everybody, ABC 10 meteorologist Brenden Mincheff here. We're going to talk about the drought, which really, honestly, has not changed very much here in Northern California. But we're also going to talk about something that is a little bit more concerning, and that would be that the world just had some of the hottest days on record over the last week. So we'll start here in California with that drought number. 71.95% of the state is not in any drought at all. That abnormally dry part of the state, which is either recovering or entering drought, but not technically drought, about 23.5%, and still about 4.5% of the state in that moderate drought category. But still, year over year, this is way, way better than where we were at this time last year. So really no changes to the map in terms of our reservoirs. Shasta at 92% capacity, Oroville at 98%, Folsom at 94% capacity. This is all as of July 9th. Here's the other thing. We're still looking at a little bit of snow. That percent of April 1st average from northern to central to southern Sierra, though, is finally in the single digits. It's about 8% across the Sierra right now. And obviously these average to date numbers are incredibly bloated, but that percent of April 1st average, which is really the seasonable amount of snow, we're less than 10% of a normal year of snow. Now, of course, that normally peaks on April 1st, so the fact that we still have some, even as we roll through now into the second full week of July, relatively impressive at this point in the year, especially compared to the last couple of years we had. Let's take a look back at the last few days in Sacramento, though. Look at these high temperatures in the 80s. That comes after we had 2 days to start the month in the triple digits at 109 degrees, easily the hottest days we've had so far this year. And even yesterday in downtown Sacramento, the high temperature was 79 degrees, which is actually really impressive because it was only the 8th time that we've had a July day with a high temperature in the 70s, only the 8th time since the year 2000. And of course, that was 79 degrees for Sunday that we just had in Sacramento. But the good times with those mild temperatures are coming to an end. High pressure beginning to build back in to California as we go through this coming week. So even though we've been on the mild side of this high pressure, while places like New Mexico, Texas, and parts of the South have been baking under that heat, we've kind of had that opposite effect, because that's what happens to the heat dome, right? When one area experiences a lot of that heat, somewhere else is experiencing kind of the opposite, the milder side of that. And that's been California. But as this high builds in, as we go through this coming week and through the weekend, that is just going to send temperatures climbing quite significantly. So as we look at the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook for much of the country, you can see the orange and red colors, and especially the deep red colors. That's where things are expected to be quite warm. So very likely warmer over much of the desert Southwest, and that moves into California as well. Likely warmer across parts of the Pacific Northwest. The only part of the United States that's likely going to be cooler is kind of that upper Midwest region and upper Great Plains, where it'll be likely just a little bit cooler than average. But even for the Northeast, leaning warmer. But the big story is definitely going to be the heat in the West, and especially here in California as we approach this coming weekend. In addition to the heat in Northern California, one of the other things that, we got to start thinking about more and more is that fire potential. Things are going to get hot. Things are drying out. Really, it's been a while since we had some rain, especially in the valley. And that means things, again, are really starting to dry regardless of how hot it has been. So as we start to talk about this coming weekend, not only the heat, but also the fire potential. So very dry in that moderate risk anywhere in the Brown. That goes from the coast all the way into the Sacramento Valley, even parts of the northern Sierra as well. The high elevations, the parts of the Sierra that are kind of at the highest, it's in that lower risk because they've had more rain, and it's going to take a little bit longer for things up there to dry out as opposed to the grass and the low-lying shrubs in the valley. So that's definitely something that we're going to be watching as we go through this coming weekend. We'll take a look at the fuel, and this is the energy release component for the Sacramento Valley. So where we are right now is here, right there at the bottom. That's where we currently are. And it has dropped over the last few days because of the cooler temperatures. And so the energy release component, what this is showing, is really the potential for things to burn and how significant it could burn. So the lower the number, the lower percentage, the less opportunity there is to burn. And the higher that number goes, the more opportunity there is. Now, you also see this line starting to spike. This is as we go through this coming weekend into the weekend, as temperatures really start to warm up. That's when we're going to be looking at that number actually climbing and climbing up above the average for this time of year. So definitely, like I said, something we got to start thinking about all the time as we move into the hotter and drier portions of the year. The good news, as we talk about the fire danger for this coming weekend, is there's not really any trigger. We're not looking at those strong winds. We're not looking at lightning. So it's just going to be hot, just going to be dry, but still that is enough that we really need to pay attention to it and make sure that we're being safe, especially if we're going to be outdoors, if we're going to be using campfires, open flames, no matter what it is. The focus of this story that we're about to hear, though, is going to be the week that we just had, because we set the hottest days on record across the globe. So Monday, July 3rd, the average temperature across planet Earth was 62.62 degrees Fahrenheit. On Tuesday and Wednesday, that at the time then broke the record at 62.92 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, both July 4th, July 5th. That's across the globe. Thursday, July 6th, clocked in at the hottest day we've had on record, 63.01 degrees Fahrenheit. And it honestly was not even that close when you think about the averages across the globe. And this is almost a tenth of a degree Fahrenheit warmer than Tuesday and Wednesday was. Friday was the second hottest day, 62.96 degrees Fahrenheit. And this number can be a little bit hard to comprehend a little bit, because it's not the average high temperature, not the average low temperature. It's the average of both of them across the whole globe. So it's not like any one place experienced an average temperature of 63 degrees. This was for the globe. It's a little bit of an abstract number, but it's an important way and an important tool that we can use to measure how hot or cool the Earth is. And so this is the map from yesterday for Sunday. And we can see in the red colors, those are areas that have been much above average, the deeper reds, and then the blue colors, and especially the deep blue into those purple colors, areas that have been much below average. And honestly, most of the globe is in that red color, and especially the oceans too, which hold in a lot of heat as well. But you also look at Central Europe in that dark red, parts of the Middle East into Eastern Europe in that dark red color, parts of Siberia, China, look at that, the dark red color over there. They've been dealing with some pretty significant drought as well this year. Parts of the Saharan desert. And then as we look into South America, most of South America in that red color, but this even continues up into northern Mexico, in towards Texas, New Mexico, and then also up into the Pacific Northwest and Western Canada, and also Greenland. So there's a lot of places and a lot of people that have been experiencing some pretty significant heat over the last few days. And when we look at the chart, now this chart started back in the 70s, right? That's when we started keeping official records, but we can go back further than that. And really look at ice cores, at tree rings, and start to piece together the composition of the atmosphere, of temperatures, of CO2, and things like that. But it's really quite shocking when you look at this map, because look at how much above every other year on record that we've had. The observed high, 63.01 degrees Fahrenheit. That was on Thursday of last week. That orange line here, that was 2022. And you can see just over the last year how much warmer this year is on record. And yes, we do have El Nino building, but El Nino is not the sole reason that we've been much warmer. This line here, this little dashed line in the middle, is kind of that average, that mean that's closer to what you'd expect or what you'd want to see. But with climate change and with the world warming up each and every year, obviously these numbers are going to be higher and higher, and it's only going to continue to warm unless we start to really sort out our emissions and climate change situation. And that's what leads us to this story here. So I spoke with somebody from Climate Central about the hottest days we've had on record, what it means, why that number is kind of difficult to understand, but really the importance of really understanding that these hotter days are only going to continue.
This is, I think, really hard to put in perspective, right? This is a temperature that's the average over the planet. It's a temperature that in some ways nobody experiences, but it's a temperature that in some ways everybody experiences, right?
Dr. Pershing admits that the global average temperature is somewhat of an abstract number.
But, it's a really, really important metric that we can use to track the changes going on the planet.
And the changes are coming at us fast.
I mean, we're not just like barely getting above the previous, we're just really shattering what the temperatures that we've had, anytime in, prior Julys. So it's really, really remarkable. So it's just another piece of evidence that says that we live on a planet that is warming up, that's too hot because of things that humans have done. This is based on reanalysis that NOAA does every day. So they take weather observations and models and kind of smush them together. And so it's really our first look at the numbers. We'll get more look at what this global number is, in a couple of weeks when NOAA and NASA bring out their numbers. But but that's just one view. Like, we can do things like look at the ice core data from Greenland. And if you look at the ice core data from Greenland, you see that these, the temperatures that we're experiencing now are the warmest that we've probably experienced on the planet in the last 125,000 years, right? I mean, okay, so another number that's really hard to put your head around, but 125,000 years ago, every Homo sapien, every human lived in Africa. This was just about the time when our species was starting to make its way out of Africa, gonna go into Europe and start to, duke it out with the Neanderthals, right? That's what we're talking about here. This is not a temperature that we as a species have experienced in a long time. It's not a temperature that we as a civilization that builds cities, that lives together in really high densities has ever experienced. And that's where the challenges are going to come from.
Still, we know that there are natural cycles that have impacts on global average temperature, including El Nino, which is currently brewing in the Pacific. But this type of warming is bigger than El Nino.
Every El Nino is adding a small amount on top of the global average temperature. It's making the global average temperature just a little bit warmer. It takes us about 5 years to make up that amount of warming, and just in terms of the trends. And so what this means is, okay, this El Nino absolutely is adding on top of the global patterns, but 5 years from now, an average year will be as warm as this El Nino year is.
Despite this, California has seen a wet winter and mild year so far, with a very delayed onset of summer conditions. Some might point to this as evidence against climate change.
No, it doesn't disprove climate change, right? Because I think these global patterns are really that's the strongest evidence for climate change. As you move down to smaller and smaller chunks of the planet, you see more and more kinds of variability coming into play. So the fact that that California is cooler this spring, probably, the El Niños probably had a big part of that. The other piece of that is every time we see these big bulges in the atmosphere that give rise to these kind of heat dome events that create really intense heat somewhere else, there's sort of a yin and yang that goes on where there's a cool bit somewhere else that kind of balances that out. And that's California was kind of on the lucky side of what's been going on in Texas. But if you look at those two together, the heat on the hot side that's so much more extreme than the cool is on the cool side. I think everybody lives in their own climate bubbles, and everybody lives in their own information bubbles. And nature is trying really hard to puncture through our individual climate bubbles. Every place around the country, we can look at the warming trends in California, and you see that on average summers are a couple of degrees Fahrenheit warmer. It doesn't mean every day is that, but that's sort of what kind of the pressure on the system is. And so more and more of these events are going to start to break through, and it's really, really hard to deny climate change if you're sitting in the middle of really, really uncomfortable heat or a flood or these kind of major events. I think the information bubble is even harder, right? There's definitely an active group out there that's working very hard to deny this, and they every year they have to work even harder and harder because nature's trying to punch through. I think eventually people will, eventually it will break through. I think eventually, everybody's going to have to start to grapple with this. And, the business community is dealing with this, right? They know that, dollars are at stake. And so they're working really hard to figure out how can they run their businesses in an effective way. That's a big part of what modern business strategy is about right now. Anybody that's not taking climate change into account is leaving money on the table and putting their shareholders at risk.
As long as human society continues to operate with little to no regard for the consequences of our climate-altering actions,
we're going to continue to set records. We're going to probably continue to set records. They're going to keep popping. Things will blink around. But our global average temperatures don't usually peak until around the 1st of August. So we are likely to continue to set these records. And that means that this year is likely to be, if not the second warmest year, perhaps the warmest year ever, right? That's kind of what we're looking at. This is concerning because every degree that every 1/10 of a degree that we add onto these global temperatures just increases the risks around the world. It increases the risks that anybody is going to experience heat that is uncomfortable, that they're not used to. It increases the impact on agriculture, right? It changes the species that you can grow. It increases the variability in rainfall. It increases the intensity of rainfall. I think I'm an oceanographer. The thing that that I'm starting to get really worried about is coral reefs. Like, this is going to be a really, really bad year for coral reefs, right? El Niños are always bad. That's when we get our kind of mass coral bleaching events. You add an El Niño on top of 1.3 degrees Celsius of global warming, you're going to really see some stress around the world in those ecosystems. And it's a global problem that the scientists have been telling people about for a long time. The world we're living in now, these are the projections that were made in the 80s and 90s, very, very consistent, that said that if we didn't reduce carbon emissions, that this was the world we were going to get. And so now we look at a new set of projections that say things are going to get even worse if we don't reduce our carbon emissions. And so that's the grand global challenge. And there's been some great progress in the US. I think we've started to take some positive steps, but we're not there yet. The rest of the world is also, I think, I'm generally finding some good news out there in terms of what China and Europe and India are trying to do, but we just we can't do it fast enough. We really just need to do it faster and harder. It's just really a challenge.